John Frost, who stands charged with the crime of high treason by order of the magistrates.
Welcome to WatchMojoUK, and today we're counting down 20 of the most shocking and surprising revelations on Who Do You Think You Are?
It's practically a line from Hamlet.
Before we begin, we publish new content every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.
Number 20. Leslie Garett and the possible poisoning.
Death from poisoning by carbolic acid, accidentally administered. Oh, for goodness sake. Wow. By whom?
Perhaps more shocking than the story itself was singer Leslie Garett's overjoyed reaction to the fact that her great-great-grandmother died after ingesting carbolic acid. Contemporary news reports and the death certificate said that the carbolic acid, which was a commonly used disinfectant, was administered accidentally to Mary Ann Garett.
The medicine bottle was also on the mantelshelf, and it too was labelled and similar in shape to the one containing the poison.
Though she only had a tablespoon of it, and a doctor was sent for immediately, she died in a matter of minutes. Garett talks to a pathologist who says that a tablespoon was more than enough, and that many people actually died the same way back when the substance was regularly kept in houses.
But people were very concerned about this. There were about 200 deaths a year due to carbolic acid swallowed.
Garett still suspected that her great-granddad Charlie might have done it on purpose.
My great-grandfather just said sorry, gave her the wrong bottle, and he was believed.
Number 19. Kate Winslet's imprisoned relative.
So Anders stole.
Yeah, and why did he steal?
Because he was starving,
Yeah,
and so were his children.
His child, the youngest child, had died, and so he needed food for his family.
She headed to Sweden to learn about her ancestry on her mother's side and her great-great-great-grandfather Anders Johnson. But she soon found out not only that one of his children died young, but that in 1832 he was arrested, along with another man, for stealing barrels of potatoes.
Good on you, Anders. I would have stolen the potatoes as well.
She then finds out that he was sent to prison for this, and that he sadly died in prison in a nearby castle.
Stated that he is 42 years old and has never been suspected of any crime. My God, so he was only a year younger than me.
She goes to the castle to talk to another historian about what happened, finding out that he'd stolen other things too, including some beehives full of honey. He was sentenced to be whipped, but died when he contracted typhus before the sentence was carried out.
Buried April the 3rd, arrested man Anders Johnson, 43 years old, died of nerve fever.
Number 18. Nigella Lawsons' vanished family.
It's very different from all those big Lions houses and everything, isn't it? So obviously a very small house, a lot of children, no money, no food, and no sanitary conditions.
It's no secret that Nigella Lawson, whose father was a peer in the House of Lords and whose mother was a restaurant heiress, came for money. But that isn't the entire story, as she learned when she investigated her roots.
I mean, in itself, it doesn't tell me that much, that 2 children have apparently vanished.
She found that she had Dutch ancestry and a lot of Jewish ancestry, but also that her great-great-grandfather, Barnet Salmon, grew up in poverty.
Barnet was determined to break away from the poverty of his background. He escaped the East End slums in his early 20s and began to build a reputation as a tobacco dealer.
In the 1840s, Salmon and his siblings lived in a tiny house in Spitalfields, London, where multiple children died of diseases related to malnutrition and unsanitary living. She found this out after 2 of the children disappeared from records, and she went searching for their death certificates to put the pieces together.
Asher died in March 42 and Harriet in November 42, so that's pretty near one another.
Number 17. Graham Norton's shotgun wedding. Norton grew up in the Republic of Ireland, but his mother was Northern Irish and had roots in Belfast. So he headed across the border to learn about that side of the family, recalling childhood visits to Belfast during the Troubles as he went.
I loved going to Belfast because I loved my grandparents and stuff, but it was so scary.
He ran into trouble during the research though, because his great-grandmother had recorded 2 different maiden names on different documents. He wanted to know why, coming to suspect that she was illegitimate, and that's why she had no father listed on her marriage certificate.
That does really shock me, because even now you'd get a bit of a move on down the aisle.
But most shocking was learning that she was already 8 months pregnant when she walked down the aisle.
My grandmother would have been mortified if she'd known this. That her mother had been 8 months pregnant going down the aisle.
Number 16. Claire Balding's great-grandfather.
He's a very public figure, he's an MP, and he's clearly living a lifestyle that suggests he might be engaged in illegal acts.
Even more aristocratic than Nigella is Claire Balding. It's true that her lineage was even more well known before appearing on the show, and can eventually be traced back to Henry VII, disturbingly through more than one close relative.
These are all your Stanley family ancestors.
Bit overwhelming.
But the show focused largely on investigating her great-grandfather, Sir Malcolm Bullock, to determine whether or not he was gay.
And I think there he provides an opportunity for probably a group of gay men to basically socialise with each other.
Gosh, you just say that as if it's accepted fact. Group of gay MPs, Malcolm Bullock was one of them.
Bullock was an MP between the 1920s and 1950s, and there were always rumours that he was. But as Balding points out, at the time, it would have been a crime had he been discovered, and his career certainly would have ended, so it had to stay secret.
In my mind, there's no doubt that he was gay.
Number 15. Greg Davys' illegitimate ancestor.
So, William Owen is the name of my great-grandfather.
It would seem so, yes.
Though he grew up in Shropshire, Greg Davys' parents were both Welsh and drove him across the border so that he wouldn't be born in England. He found out that his great-grandmother hadn't been married to his great-grandfather, and their kids had been born out of wedlock.
That would have been a local scandal, do you think?
Yes, probably.
They weren't married?
No, they weren't, no. And they've had 2 children together.
She eventually took him to court to try and get the child support payments he owed her, but he didn't have any money.
And the reason he was never mentioned by our family is because no one, apart from Elizabeth, my great-grandmother, I don't think knew who he was.
He kept investigating William Owen, who turned out to have trouble with drink. He was even arrested at one point for being drunk and in charge of a horse and cart, as well as once attempting to climb Mount Snowdon in the middle of the night.
Mrs. Carroll said she could not say he was drunk, neither could she say he was sober, but he was more drunk than sober.
Number 14. Sarah Millican and the Pegasus disaster.
It says, it was our painful duty to announce the melancholy catastrophe, the loss of the Pegasus steamer.
None of Millican's relatives died in the Pegasus disaster in 1843, but one ancestor, James, did work for a shipping company that employed him and others to retrieve things from shipwrecks. This included the grisly work of bringing bodies to the surface, which families of the deceased would give rewards for.
The surface of the water was covered in the dead and the dying. The screeching was fearful. Wow. That's horrific, isn't it?
The details of the disaster were harrowing, but more shocking is that an event like this could be so widely forgotten, buried in 19th century newspapers.
The divers have 40% on the value of all they bring up. It's described as melancholy work, wrenching open boxes and tearing out their saturated contents.
She read through advertisements placed offering cash rewards for the recovery of loved ones' remains in these disturbing scenes. Number 13. David Tennant's Orange Order relatives. Though he believed nearly his entire family came from Scotland, Tennant went off to Northern Ireland to meet the relatives of his maternal great-grandfather after losing the trail for the Scottish side of the family.
My father was... he was an Orange man.
Oh, he was?
He was.
He was surprised to find out that his Northern Irish family weren't only Protestants, but that at least one of them had been an Orange man, a member of the notorious Orange Order. His relatives actually gave him one of the orange sashes they had, which shocked and disturbed him.
Was William in a lodge as well?
I don't know.
Right.
You could probably follow that through, maybe through the Memorial Hall.
He found it hard to reconcile that his family could have belonged to the Orange Order, particularly during the Troubles.
How did you feel when you were handed that sash?
Not great. Even now, I'm not that comfortable holding it.
Number 12. Sheridan Smith and the alleged arsonist. This one was full of twists and turns, as Sheridan Smith went to Sheffield to unearth her family history.
Shortly before 4 o'clock this morning, a fire broke out on the premises of Mr. Doubleday, Woodman Inn, Sheffield Moor.
She was looking for information about her great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Doubleday, who tried to make it as a musician playing the banjo, but she found out that he had a number of suspicious arsons in his history.
It is, and he taught himself to bring up his kids and everything he's done for his family, that this now just seems like a different person.
A pub he owned actually burned down when the building was totally empty, leading investigators to suspect it was done for the insurance, charging him for it.
There's scarcely any furniture in any of the rooms. Doubleday was the only person on the premises. He was leaving the house this week, having removed most of his belongings.
But she kept digging and eventually learned that he was found not guilty, so hopefully that verdict was correct and he didn't start the fire. Number 11. Stephen Fry's wartime history.
Place of death, Auschwitz camp. So that's my grandfather's sister, my mother's aunt.
An immense tragedy was uncovered when Stephen Fry traced his roots, wanting to learn more about his Jewish heritage. It was difficult to watch him find out that some of his closest relatives, including his great-aunt, perished in Auschwitz during the war after being sent there by the Nazis.
So that's the other girl. That's Elisa. Date of death 44, Auschwitz camp.
His family didn't initially know exactly what had happened to them, only that they had been taken to Auschwitz and never heard from again, but presumably had died.
It's so stupid because I knew this. We all knew they'd died, at least believed it.
He had an old family photograph, and it was deeply heartbreaking putting faces to the names as he goes through the list of his cousins, most of whom died within the walls of the Nazis' most notorious camps. Number 10. Boris Johnson is related to King George II. As an old Etonian and Oxbridge graduate, it shouldn't really come as a surprise that Boris Johnson is posh enough to be related to royalty.
So she is, of course, Augusta Caroline, Princess of Brunswick.
Oh yeah, she rings a bell.
And the wonderful thing is her mother is...
Her mother is... Oh, look at this, Augusta Hanover.
But back in 2008, he was notable as one of the first celebs to find a King of England in his family tree. Turns out that Johnson is directly descended from King George II. For those who don't know their horrible history songs, he was the bad one. King George was a Hanoverian, so an ancestor of our current royal family. That means that Boris is distantly related to the Queen, the Swedish and Dutch royals, and even the Romanovs.
I guess I always thought of myself, and always thought of our family as being basically a bunch of Turkish, Jewish, mixed with this weird granny butter Baron de Pfeffel stuff. So I always felt a bit of a, as I say, the product of incomers, product of newcomers to Britain.
Number 9. Mark Wright didn't expect the Spanish Inquisition. Towie star Mark Wright has always believed that his blood was Italian. Turns out, that was a myth. The family was Spanish, hailing from Jaén in Andalusia. Mark discovered that their roots were also Jewish. The family had fled Spain to escape the Inquisition after one ancestor was burnt at the stake and another subjected to torture. The tortured man was named David Antonio. He managed to hold out long enough to convince his tormentors that he was not a practicing Jew and concocted a plan to escape the country with his family. On a lighter note, he was also a master swordsman, so Mark got to do some swashbuckling. Number 8. Josh Widdicombe is descended from Henry VIII, possibly. Josh Widdicombe's family history journey took him back to Mary Boleyn. She was his 14 times great-grandmother, sister to Anne Boleyn, and mistress of Henry VIII.
My great-great-great-great whatever aunt is Anne Boleyn.
She's also the main character in The Other Boleyn Girl. Many historians believe that Catherine Knollys, Mary's daughter, was also Henry's illegitimate child. Catherine is also Josh's ancestor. As the comedian was very excited to discover, this means he could be a direct descendant of Henry VIII.
She, we know, had a relationship with the king, with King Henry VIII.
No.
Yes. Mary was Henry's mistress.
However, even if this is fake news, Josh still has some royal blood. On the Boleyn side, he can trace his ancestry back to King Henry I, so there's a consolation prize.
Oh my word. King Edward I.
Number 7, Jack Whitehall's unlikable ancestor.
So what happened then?
Well, hopefully they beat him up.
Comedian and actor Jack Whitehall has made a career out of being posh. That is to say, a lot of his comedy involves poking fun at himself and his background. Taking part in Who Do You Think You Are with his dad Michael, Jack hoped to find some ancestors who were a bit more relatable. What he got was Thomas Jones Phillips, a lawyer and, as Jack puts it, a perennial snitch.
Some of the reigning Chartists get put on trial.
Please don't be.
Jones Phillips played a part in opposing the Chartists, a political group who fought for working men to have the vote. During the Newport Uprising, Jack's ancestor tracked down their inspirational leader, John Frost, and turned him in for the reward. His 4 times great-grandson was not impressed.
And in fact, knowing what I know about you and your ancestry, I think going forward, I'm going to have to sever ties with you and focus on Mummy.
Number 6, Patrick Stewart's father suffered from shell shock.
And here he is again in what would have been his Second World War uniform.
When Patrick Stewart agreed to take part in Who Do You Think You Are, he planned to find out about his father's military service. Stewart's childhood home had been marred by domestic violence, but his memories of his father were mixed. He remembered the violent man, but also the exciting war stories his father used to tell. In this deeply personal episode, Stewart wanted to explore and understand the conflicting sides of his father's character.
But in an aerial attack, a nearby bomb explosion gave him shell shock, from which he still suffers.
Over the course of the programme, the actor discovered that his father suffered from shell shock. We would now call it PTSD.
We know now that it builds up a level of stress and anger. And of course, what I experienced from 1945 onwards was an angry man.
Yeah.
Who maybe hadn't been angry before.
This discovery gave the actor some new insight into a man who may have been different had he never gone to war. Number 5, Judy Dench's Shakespeare connection. Judy Dench is now a familiar face on the big screen, thanks to film roles in projects such as Shakespeare in Love and Philomena. But primarily, she's a Shakespearean actress. Her first role at the Old Vic Theatre was playing Ophelia in Hamlet.
Better, you might know the English name better, Elsinore.
It's Elsinore.
Yeah, that's...
The play is set in Denmark, in the royal castle of Elsinore, where Ophelia lives with her father. While investigating her family history, Dame Judy was shocked to discover that she actually had an ancestor who lived in the real Danish castle. Even better, she turned out to be related to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who were actual characters in the play.
So those were part of his family?
Those were part of his family.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern?
Exactly.
Who Shakespeare?
It was an emotional discovery for the actress and a fascinating coincidence for the viewer.
Well, maybe the stories that Will Kemp brought back could have been some kind of inspiration to Shakespeare to write about.
Number 4, Alan Cummings' grandfather's real cause of death. Actor Alan Cummings investigated a family story that was a bit closer to home. His mother's father, Tom, was killed while serving as a police officer in Malaysia. Supposedly, a gun that he was cleaning backfired.
You don't clean a gun like this, and you don't kill yourself like this.
But when Alan spoke to an old service comrade, he uncovered a different story. His grandfather died from a gun wound to the back of the head.
And that was that he was playing Russian roulette.
The story was he had been playing Russian roulette. Apparently, he was a habitual player. It is suspected that his luck ran out or he got careless. Does this mean he accidentally shot himself? Or did somebody find out he was cheating and have him killed? Either way, it wasn't the story that his grandson expected to find.
I feel really sad for him.
Number 3. Matthew Pinsent, related to God? There have been a few instances of royal ancestors cropping up on Who Do You Think You Are, but the reveal during Matthew Pinsent's episode is one of the most bizarre.
So your direct ancestor is
Was Edward I.
Yeah.
The Olympic medalist traced his lineage back to the Plantagenet kings. He discovered that he was a direct descendant of Edward I. He was then shown an archaic scroll that follows the line of succession back even further. As the medieval royals were keen to justify their claim to the divine right of kings, the scroll takes some unexpected turns.
There's Jesus. Stop it. Why do they put Jesus on there?
According to this particular document, Matthew is related to Jesus, King David, Adam and Eve, and, right at the very top, God. As he says, that's pretty much as far as you can go.
Matthew is, with certainty, directly descended from kings.
Number 2. Ainsley Harriot's slave-owning ancestors.
So the Harriet was originally a white name then?
Ainsley Harriot's search took him to the Caribbean island of Jamaica, where his father grew up. Although he assumed that his ancestors had been brought to Jamaica as slaves, the TV chef was still in for an unpleasant shock. He discovered that his family name originally came from a white slave owner, his 2 times great-grandfather, James Gordon Harriot.
I need to sit down, this is so sorry.
Ainsley visited the estate where slaves and slave owners, both his distant relatives, once lived. Good or bad, it's part of my makeup, he concluded. The history of the Harriot family really encapsulates the history of the West Indies.
That shows owning slaves went back generations in the Harriot family.
Number 1. Danny Dyer's royal pedigree. Will there ever be an episode like this one? Professional Cockney geezer Danny Dyer didn't expect to find any money in his family tree. At the beginning of his journey, we didn't either. Tragic tales of poverty and the workhouse began the story, but then something remarkable happened. He hit an aristocratic line. After the first breakthrough, they just keep coming.
And I think actually there is more than a passing resemblance.
He learned about Thomas Cromwell, advisor to Henry VIII and his 15 times great-grandfather. He then followed the Seymour line, Cromwell married his son into nobility, and discovered he was directly descended from the Plantagenet kings.
So you are directly descended from King Edward III of England?
Can't be. Can't be.
Among his other direct ancestors, he can count Eleanor of Aquitaine, William the Conqueror, and King Louis IX, who was even canonised as a saint.
That is my 22 times great-grandfather, Edward III. So basically, the king.
King.
Let us know in the comments if you've ever researched your ancestry in depth.
This has confirmed that one wrong choice and it could end.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojoUK and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.